This portrait of three children looked innocent at first, until experts revealed a hidden story. The antique shop in Charleston smelled faintly of old wood and mothballs. Marcus Williams had been browsing estate sale items for over an hour when he noticed a small daguerreotype in a worn silver frame, partially hidden behind a stack of depression glass. As a researcher for the Equal Justice Initiative, documenting the history of slavery in America, Marcus trained himself to look for images that told stories beyond what appeared on the surface. This photograph stopped him in his tracks. Three children, likely between 8 and 10 years old, sat together on an ornate garden bench. Two white children, a boy and a girl with blonde ringlets, sat on either side of a black child in the center. All three wore expensive clothes. The white boy had a tailored suit with a bow tie. The girl wore a fancy dress trimmed with lace. The black child was dressed just as neatly in a pressed white shirt, dark vest, and trousers similar to the white boy's. All three were smiling, real smiles, not the stiff expressions common in 1850s photographs. Their bodies were close, comfortable with each other. The white girl rested her hand on the black child's shoulder. The white boy leaned in slightly as if they had been laughing just before the photo was taken. At first glance, it seemed like a sweet moment. The image appeared to show a tender friendship crossing the racial boundaries of antebellum South Carolina, the kind of photograph suggesting children might have seen past their parents' prejudices. But Marcus had learned not to trust appearances. He lifted the frame and studied it under the shop's dim light. The photograph was dated on the back in faded ink, summer 1854, Charleston. A photographer's stamp read Whitmore Studios. Marcus examined each child's face closely. The white children looked relaxed and happy, but the black child's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something else there, something hard to define, perhaps weariness or fear, hidden behind a forced expression of happiness. Then Marcus noticed it. The black child's sleeves had ridden up slightly on both arms. Around each wrist, barely visible in the photograph's sepia tones, were discolored bands of skin suggesting long-term rubbing. Marcus had seen similar marks in other historical photos and records. They were clear signs of shackles worn over long periods. Marcus's hands began to tremble. This was not a simple picture of three children playing as equals. It was something far darker, a staged image showing horror while pretending to show care and harmony. He bought the photograph for $30 and went straight to his car. Sitting in the parking lot, he studied it again under better light, using his phone's camera to zoom in. The wrist marks were unmistakable and other details became clearer. The black child sat slightly forward on the bench, as if ready to get up at any moment. His posture, despite the smile, was tense. His clothing, though fine, seemed a little too big, perhaps passed down or bought without care. This child had been enslaved, Marcus realized, dressed in fine clothes and posed with his enslaver's children as if equal, yet marked by the chains that revealed his true status. Marcus needed to know who these children were, what had happened to them, and why this photo had been staged. He started his car and drove back to his office in Montgomery, Alabama, already planning the research that would take months at the Equal Justice Initiative's research center. Marcus placed the daguerreotype under bright lights and photographed it from every angle. The digital images revealed details not visible at first glance. The marks on the black child's wrists were clear under magnification, bands of lighter skin roughly an inch wide, with faint scarring along the edges. Marcus had documented similar injuries before. Enslaved children who were shackled, whether as punishment, to prevent escape, or as a display of control, developed these characteristic marks. The skin lightened where metal pressed constantly and scar tissue formed where the shackles rubbed during movement or struggle. Marcus began with the photographer's mark, Whitmore Studios, Charleston, 1854. Historical records showed that Edward Whitmore ran a successful photography studio in Charleston. 1851 to 1863. He served wealthy families who could afford the costly daguerreotype process and advertised portraits of distinction and children captured with artistic care. Marcus found dozens of Whitmore's photographs in archives and museums. The photographer had a recognizable style: outdoor settings when possible, natural poses, careful attention to clothing and backgrounds showing wealth and status. Many of his portraits included enslaved servants in the background, placed to show the family's prosperity. But this photograph was different. The enslaved child was not in the background. He was in the center, seated between the white children and dressed just as well. This photo was not about showing off servants. It conveyed something else entirely. Marcus contacted colleagues at the Charleston Museum and the South Carolina Historical Society, sending high-resolution images of the photograph. Within days, he received a reply from Dr. Patricia Green, a historian specializing in antebellum Charleston families. "I believe I've identified the white children," Patricia's email began. "The clothing style and connection to Whitmore Studios led me to some prominent Charleston families in 1854. I found a matching photograph in our collection, a formal family portrait taken the same year of the Hartwell family, Colonel James Hartwell, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 children, William and Charlotte. The children in your photograph match William and Charlotte Hartwell exactly." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He recognized the Hartwell name. Colonel James Hartwell had been one of Charleston's wealthiest plantation owners, controlling more than 2,000 acres of land and, according to the 1850 census slave schedule, enslaving 187 people. Patricia's email continued, "Here's what's interesting. I found a reference to this particular photograph in Eleanor Hartwell's diary, which had been donated to our archives in the 1920s. She wrote about commissioning Whitmore to photograph the children at play with their little companion. She never named the black child, referring to him only as being constantly with them, and noted that William and Charlotte were very fond of the boy. There was something deeply unsettling about the casual way she described it, as though it were completely normal for her children to play with an enslaved child while he wore shackles." Marcus requested copies of Eleanor Hartwell's complete diary. When the scanned pages arrived, he spent days reading entries from 1852 to 1856, searching for any mention of the black child in the photograph. Eleanor wrote often about her children, their lessons, health, and social development, and she mentioned the boy in dozens of entries, always without giving his name. Her diary painted a disturbing picture of how enslaved children existed in the lives of wealthy white families, constantly present yet invisible, valued yet entirely disposable. Marcus compiled every reference to the boy who appeared wit. H. William and Charlotte. March 1853. William has grown quite attached to the boy from the quarters. James says it is natural for children to play together, and that the boy is well behaved and clean. I have instructed Mammy to ensure he is properly dressed when he comes into the house. July 1853. Charlotte insists the boy attend her lessons. I have allowed it, though of course he cannot learn to read or write. That would be illegal and dangerous. Still, he sits quietly as she practices her letters, and his presence seems to encourage her diligence. December 1853. The boy attempted to run away last week. James was deeply disappointed. We had treated him well, granting privileges uncommon for his station. James had him punished appropriately and fitted with restraints to prevent future incidents. The children were distressed by the sight, so I explained that discipline, though unpleasant, is necessary for the boy's own good and for the safety of our family. Marcus felt nauseated as he read. The restraints mentioned so casually were the shackles that had left marks on the child's wrists, marks still visible in the photograph. Taken 6 months later, January 1854, the boy had apparently grown used to his restraints. He no longer resisted them and had returned to his usual cheerful manner with the children. William asked why the boy must wear chains when he and Charlotte do not. Eleanor wrote, I explained that different rules apply to different people and that the boy's restraints are a kind of proper guidance, strict perhaps, but necessary for correct development. Marcus stopped reading, his hands clenched into fists. The psychological manipulation was staggering, teaching the enslaved child that his chains were a form of care, and teaching the white children that some people deserved bondage, while others deserved freedom based solely on skin color. Yet Eleanor never once recorded the boy's name. Across dozens of entries spanning years, he was always the boy or their little companion. This erasure was intentional. Enslaved people were not seen as individuals with identities, they were property, defined by function rather than humanity. Marcus needed to find the child's real name. He requested the Hartwell plantation records from the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. Plantation ledgers typically listed enslaved people by name and assigned labor. If the child belonged to the Hartwell estate, there would be documentation. The ledgers arrived as digital scans, heavy leather-bound volumes filled with precise handwriting recording the buying, selling, births, deaths, and labor assignments of human beings treated as property. Marcus forced himself to read through the dehumanizing language, searching for a child who matched the boy in the photograph. In the 1850s ledger under house servants' children, he found an entry that made him catch his breath. Samuel, male, approximately 9 years old, assigned as children's comp. Anion and light household duties. Mother Rose deceased 1852, father unknown. Note, flight risk secured as of December 1853. Due Samuel. At last the boy had a name. Marcus traced Samuel's presence in the Hartwell records both before and after 1854. The documentation was sparse, but devastating. Samuel had been born on the Hartwell plantation around 1845. His mother, Rose, had worked as a house servant until her death in 1852. Because he was listed simply as fever term, Marcus realized it could cover everything from colic to exhaustion to punishment. After Rose's death, the 1-year-old Samuel had been assigned to work in the main house. The 1853 ledger noted, "Samuel shows intelligence and obedience, and has been assigned to attend Master William and Miss Charlotte, assisting with their needs and providing companionship well suited to the role." The tone was chilling in its calmness. Samuel had not been invited to be the children's friend. He had been assigned to them. His companionship was labor. His whole life was structured around serving white children barely older than himself. The December 1853 escape attempt also appeared in the plantation records. Samuel had been caught 2 miles from the property while trying to run away. 15 lashes were administered. He was fitted with wrist restraints to prevent future attempts. The restraints were to remain until his trustworthiness was proven. 15 lashes. Samuel had been 8 years old. Marcus found more references to Samuel in the records from 1850 to 1855. The restraints stayed on his wrists for at least 18 months, long enough to leave the permanent scars visible in the photograph. During that time, Samuel continued to serve as William and Charlotte's companion, playing with them, attending lessons, and going on walks around the plantation grounds. The photograph taken in the summer of 1854 had been made roughly 6 months after his escape attempt. Marcus looked at the image again with this new understanding. Samuel's smile now seemed clearly forced, the practiced expression of a child who had learned that cheerfulness was necessary for survival. Showing the pain and fear he felt would only bring more punishment. The white children's easy affection, Charlotte's hand resting on Samuel's shoulder, William's relaxed closeness, took on a different meaning. They may have felt genuine affection for Samuel. Children form real bonds at that age, but that affection existed entirely within a system of power in which they owned Samuel, where their father could have him whipped, shackled, or sold at any moment, and where Samuel's needs, feelings, and humanity were insignificant compared to their comfort and amusement. By 1856, the entries about Samuel shifted. Samuel, age 11, becoming unsuitable for house service, shows increasing stubbornness and resistance to instruction. Recommend reassignment to field work. Marcus understood what this meant. As Samuel grew older and the trauma of "enslave me" NT deepened, keeping up the appearance of cheerful companionship became impossible. The Hartwells interpreted his natural reaction as defiance. The final entry about Samuel appeared in October 1856. Samuel was sold to Mr. Thomas Crawford, a plantation owner in Mississippi, for $650. Proceeds recorded. Samuel was 11 years old. He was sent away from the only home he had ever known, from his mother's grave and any remaining family, alone to Mississippi. The ledger recorded the sale with the same cold detachment used for furniture or livestock. Marcus searched Mississippi plantation records to trace Samuel further, but the trail vanished. Enslaved people sold out of state were notoriously difficult to follow by design. His separation was punishment and a way to prevent family bonds. Samuel disappeared into the historical void that swallowed millions of enslaved people, whose names, lives, and fates were never recorded. All that survived were property transactions. Marcus could easily trace what became of William and Charlotte Hartwell. Their lives were documented in newspapers, society pages, wills, and family histories preserved by descendants proud of their lineage. William Hartwell attended the College of Charleston, then managed his father's plantation until the Civil War. He served as an officer in the Confederate Army and returned home afterward to find the family fortune diminished but intact. He rebuilt the plantation's prosperity using exploitative labor contracts, with freed black workers that replicated many elements of slavery under new legal frameworks. William married, had 5 children, and died in 1903 at 53. Remembered in his obituary as a pillar of Charleston society and a defender of Southern heritage, Charlotte married at 18 into another wealthy plantation family. She became known for charitable work. Ironically, much of it aimed at uplifting the black community through organizations emphasizing obedience and compliance. She lived until 1911, dying at 65. Her obituary praised her refinement and Christian virtue. Neither William nor Charlotte ever mentioned Samuel in letters, diaries, or public statements. The boy who had been their constant companion for years, who appeared in photographs beside them, who played with them daily while wearing shackles, was entirely erased from their memory, or at least from the records they left behind. Marcus found one exception, a letter William wrote to his father in 1857, a year after Samuel was sold. William, then 13 and attending boarding school, wrote, "I sometimes think of the boy who used to attend me when I was younger. I wonder if he fared well in his new situation. Mother wrote that you sold him to a Mississippi planter. I hope he is treated kindly there." The casual tone was shocking. Samuel's pain and the trauma of separation, which likely destroyed whatever remained of his childhood, were reduced to idle curiosity, as if he had simply changed employment. Instead of being sold like livestock and sent away from everything he knew, Marcus discovered that the Hartwell family home still stood in Charleston, now divided into luxury condominiums. The plantation land had been sold over decades, but the main house and about 10 acres remained, carefully preserved as an example of antebellum architecture. He also learned that the Hartwell family maintained an active historical society, preserving family documents and promoting their ancestors' legacy. The society's website displayed dozens of family photographs, including formal portraits of James and Eleanor Hartwell and later images of William and Charlotte as adults, but the 1854 photograph of the 3 children was missing from the family's preserved collection. At some point, someone had chosen not to include it in the official history, perhaps because Samuel's presence and the visible shackles made it uncomfortable, a reminder of a reality the family preferred to forget. Marcus knew this history had to be confronted publicly. To ensure Samuel would not be erased again, he began planning an exhibition. 6 months after discovering the photograph, Marcus stood in the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, preparing for the opening of a new permanent exhibition, Childhood Under Slavery, The Hidden Truth in Family Photographs. The 1854 image of William, Charlotte, and Samuel served as the centerpiece. Marcus worked with conservators to produce a large scale reproduction that revealed every detail, including digital enhancements that made the shackle marks on Samuel's wrists impossible to miss. Alongside the photograph were text panels explaining what viewers were seeing. The image had been staged to show an innocent childhood friendship. The main panel read, The three children are dressed in fine clothes and pose together as if equals, but look closely at the wrists of the black child. The marks visible are scars left by shackles, metal restraints this 8-year-old boy was forced to wear after trying to escape slavery. This child, whose name was Samuel, was not playing with the white children by choice. He was assigned to them as property, compelled to provide companionship while enduring violence and captivity. The exhibition also included excerpts from Eleanor Hartwell's diary, displayed alongside documentation of Samuel's escape attempt, his punishment, and his eventual sale to Mississippi. Interactive displays let visitors explore the broader context: the Hartwell family's wealth built on enslaved labor, the legal system that allowed children to be shackled and sold, and the deliberate erasure of enslaved people's names and identities from historical records. Marcus created another section tracing what happened to the three children as they grew older. Visitors could see photographs of William and Charlotte as adults, read their obituaries, and learn about their prosperous, respected lives. Then they reached a RK panel showing only Samuel's name and dates. Samuel, born around 1845, sold from South Carolina in 1856, further fate unknown. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. The lives of the white children fully recorded and celebrated, the life of Samuel vanished into historical silence. The exhibition's opening drew wide media attention. Major newspapers published features and NPR conducted an interview, but the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the opening, Marcus received an email from a woman named Grace Morrison in Jackson, Mississippi. The subject line read, "I think I'm descended from the boy in your photograph." Marcus's hands shook as he opened the message. Grace wrote, "My great-great-great-grandfather was a man named Samuel Rose. Family history says he was born enslaved in South Carolina around 1845 and sold to Mississippi as a child. After emancipation, he took his mother's surname, Rose. He lived until 1923 and told his children and grandchildren about his time in Charleston, about being forced to serve as a companion to white children while wearing chains. He specifically mentioned being photographed with those children. My family has preserved his story for generations. When I saw your exhibition, I recognized it immediately." Marcus and Grace spoke by phone for 2 hours that evening. Grace, 63, was a retired schoolteacher and keeper of her family's oral history, passed down for 5 generations from Samuel himself. She explained that he had been deeply traumatized by his years in Charleston. Samuel told his daughter, Grace's great-great-grandmother, that the worst part was not the physical violence, though it was horrific. The worst part was being forced to pretend he loved his captors, to smile, play, and act cheerful with children who owned him and could have him beaten or sold at any moment. He said it felt like betraying himself, erasing his own humanity for the comfort of white people. Samuel had been sold to a cotton plantation in Mississippi in 1856, just as the Hartwell records showed. There, Thomas Crawford forced him to work in the fields until the Civil War. After emancipation, Samuel stayed in Mississippi, first as a sharecropper, then as a railroad laborer. He married, had 6 children, and lived to 78. He was bitter, Grace said softly. Her great-great-grandmother said he rarely smiled as an adult. The forced performance of happiness he endured as a child had permanently damaged his ability to feel real joy. He told his children that white people had stolen his childhood twice. First by enslaving him, and second by forcing him to pretend that slavery was acceptable, even pleasant. Grace had photographs of Samuel later in life and sent them to Marcus by email. The images showed an elderly black man with a stern, weathered face, deep lines around his mouth, and eyes carrying decades of pain. In every photo, his hands were deliberately positioned to show his wrists and the scars that remained. 6 years after the shackles had been removed. He insisted on that, Grace explained. Whenever someone took his photograph, he made sure his wrist scars were visible. They were proof of what had been done to him, proof that could not be erased or denied. He wanted evidence to survive. Tears ran down Marcus's face. Samuel had understood something powerful. Photographs could hide the truth, as the 1854 image had tried. showing slavery as gentle and enslavers as kind. But photographs could also preserve truth if the person being photographed demanded that their reality be seen. Samuel's adult portraits, with the scars on his wrists deliberately displayed, stood as proof that contradicted the lie of the childhood image. Grace had more to share. Samuel spoke about the white children. He said Charlotte often cried when he was punished. She begged her parents not to hurt him, but she never tried to help him escape or challenge slavery. She simply didn't want to witness the violence that kept her comfortable. Samuel said that kind of selective sympathy was almost worse than open cruelty. It let white people feel righteous while doing nothing to stop the suffering. Grace had preserved more family stories. After emancipation, Samuel tried to find his extended family but learned most had been sold from the Hartwell plantation before the war. He spent decades searching for siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles, placing ads in black newspapers and writing to churches and aid societies. He found a few distant relatives but never reunited with his immediate family. Slavery scattered them so completely the bonds could never be restored, Grace said, her voice breaking. The Hartwells destroyed my family. They didn't just enslave my ancestors, they deliberately separated them, sold them away, erased their relationships, and carefully preserved their own stories, celebrating themselves while erasing the people they brutalized. Marcus knew what had to happen next. Grace's family story had to be part of the exhibition, told alongside the photograph so visitors could see that the nameless child in the image had a life, a future, and descendants carrying his story. News of the exhibition and Grace's connection reached Charleston, and the Hartwell family responded defensively. Catherine Hartwell Bennett, William's great-granddaughter, sent Marcus a long email. It was both predictable and infuriating. While we acknowledge our family's complicated history, she wrote, we believe your exhibition gives an unbalanced and anachronistic view. The Hartwells provided housing, food, and care for the enslaved people on their property, including the child in the photograph. Our ancestors were products of their time. Judging them by modern standards is unfair and harms our family legacy. Her letter argued that the photograph showed kindness. Samuel was allowed to dress well, be present in lessons, and be photographed like an equal. She suggested the marks Marcus identified as shackles might be exaggerated or photographic artifacts. Marcus replied with detailed evidence, high-resolution images of Samuel's wrist scars, Eleanor Hartwell's diary describing restraints, and plantation records of his punishment and sale. He included Grace's contact so Catherine could hear directly from Samuel's descendants. She never responded. Instead, she posted on the Hartwell Family Historical Society website, claiming activists were using photos to shame families. The statements caused strong online reactions. Historians emphasize that acknowledging atrocities is not an attack, but necessary truth-telling. Activists noted that the Hartwells' idea of reconciliation required no accountability. Only descendants of enslaved people had to stop raising uncomfortable facts. The controversy brought more visitors to the exhibition. The photograph of Samuel with William and Charlotte became widely recognized, not as a charming image, but as evidence of slavery, psychological cruelty, and the way enslavers normalized violence. Marcus invited Grace to Montgomery to see the exhibition and stand before her ancestor's image. When Grace entered the space and saw the large-scale 1854 photograph, she stopped and cried. Marcus stayed quietly beside her. He was so young, she whispered. I've always known the story, but seeing his face, how small he was, those marks on his wrists, it hits differently. He was just a child tortured, bought and sold. Like furniture. They erased his name, his mother, his humanity. But he survived. He lived. He had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. We're still here. His truth outlasted their lies. In the following months, Marcus expanded his research, seeking other photographs of enslaved children. He found a pattern. Dozens of images from the 1840s to 1860s showed white children posed with enslaved children, dressed alike, suggesting friendship or equality. These images were propaganda meant to make slavery look benign, but high-resolution examination revealed the truth: signs of malnutrition, injury, exhaustion, and tension. In some cases, like Samuel's, evidence of violence was clear. Marcus and other researchers created a database of these photographs, identifying enslaving families and naming enslaved individuals where possible. They worked with genealogists and descendants, recovering lives erased from history. Grace joined, connecting researchers with families preserving oral histories. Through this network, Marcus found 2 more photographs of Samuel at the Hartwell plantation before his sale. One showed 7-year-old Samuel standing behind Eleanor Hartwell in a formal portrait, wearing worn clothing, hands clasped, staring blankly at the camera. Even before shackles, his posture reflected trained submission. The second, taken in 1855, showed Samuel alone, fine clothes, wrists clearly shackled a year after his escape attempt, with a direct, haunted gaze. Grace wept as Marcus showed her. The Hartwells had photographed him in chains without realizing it contradicted their own story. They were so sure of their righteousness they failed to see the truth their photos preserved. Marcus included all 3 images in an expanded exhibition, arranged chronologically, from a weary 7-year-old to an 8-year-old, forced to smile while shackled, to an 11-year-old showing accumulated trauma. Adult portraits showed Samuel deliberately displaying his scars, refusing to let viewers look away. Marcus wrote in the exhibition text, "The story enslavers wanted to tell, that slavery was benign, that enslaved people were content, is false. Photographs cannot fully hide the truth. Slavery was violence. It damaged every person it touched. Survivors carried its marks for life." 1 year after discovering the photograph, the Equal Justice Initiative organized a memorial service for Samuel Rose in Charleston, on land that had been part of the Hartwell plantation. More than 200 people attended: historians, activists, descendants of enslaved people, and a few descendants of enslavers willing to confront their family history. Grace read a statement prepared by her family. Samuel Rose was born into slavery around 1845. He was forced to work as soon as he could walk, shackled as a child for seeking freedom, sold at age 11 and never returned to South Carolina. He survived the Civil War, Emancipation, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. He lived 7. Why 8 years despite a system built to destroy him? He ensured his descendants would know his story, remember his name, and understand what was done to him and what he survived. For 140 years, the photograph of Samuel with William and Charlotte had been seen as innocent. Now the truth was clear. He had been shackled, his smile coerced, and his childhood shaped by violence. Oral history had been ignored. Only the scars in the photograph revealed the truth. These histories must be preserved. Descendants' accounts must be believed. Samuel Rose existed. He mattered. He was a person, not property. He had a mother, a life beyond enslavement, and descendants who carry his memory. The Hartwells tried to erase him, but he survived. We survived. And we are here to say his name, honor his life, and ensure he is never forgotten. Marcus unveiled a memorial marker in the park, simple black granite, engraved with Samuel's name, dates, and the words, "Enslaved as a child on this land. Shackled, sold, but not broken. Remembered by those who carry his story forward." Below was a reproduction of the 1854 photograph, now annotated, arrows pointing to Samuel's wrists with the text, "The marks you see are from shackles." This child was enslaved. His name was Samuel Rose. Marcus stood with Grace, looking at the memorial. The plantation buildings were gone, replaced by suburban development, but the history remained, now impossible to ignore. "Do you think he would be satisfied with this?" Marcus asked quietly. Grace considered. Samuel spent his life fighting to be seen as fully human, to have his experiences acknowledged. He faced denial, minimization, and erasure. This memorial does what he tried to do. It names him, acknowledges what was done. Yes, I think he would find peace. She paused, looking at the photograph of 8-year-old Samuel, wrists shackled, forced to smile, but he would want people to know that remembering isn't enough. These histories are not just the past, they shaped systems and inequalities that still exist. Understanding them matters. Marcus nodded. There were thousands of photographs yet to examine, millions of names erased, descendant communities still fighting for recognition and justice. But in this moment, Samuel Rose was remembered. His face looked out from the memorial, no longer forced to smile, no longer erased, no longer silent. The photograph that had tried to hide the truth of slavery had become, through careful attention and the persistence of descendants, testimony to that truth. Samuel had reached across 170 years through an image preserved in silver and glass. His scars, visible to anyone willing to look, had finally told their story. And that story changed everything.